Katanas, one of the most despised but powerful weapons in all of the game. And while I released a video like this before the DLC came out a year and a half ago, things have changed. Too many patches were introduced, too many talismans were added, and katanas were given a whole new weapon class. So this old video doesn't really make sense anymore. So now more than ever, it is time to take a step back and look at one of the most iconic weapon classes in the game and give it an honest ranking, including the great katanas. Starting off with number 13, which is probably the worst katana out of them all. However, thematically, one of my favorites, the Dragonscale Blade. While thematically, this weapon is cool, pun intended, it falls short in every aspect that makes a good weapon. To start off with, the weapon has an incredibly poor reach, especially for a katana. In addition, it is the only katana in the game with no innate status effect buildup. Now there is a shimmer of hope for this weapon in its skill, which grants Ice Lightning. The name of the skill is Ice Lightning Sword. However, there's a problem. The skill does not carry through. First of all, Lightning Slash carries through much better than the skill in most contexts, as even though it does not give the same boost in terms of AR or, let's say, Frostbite buildup, the fact is the base damage of your weapon is going to be much higher, and you can get a weapon with actually good reach. And that is because both Lightning Slash and Ice Lightning Sword have no hyper armor. In addition, the skill is kinda slow. So in order to use the skill as an actual damage option, you kinda need that extra range to make it carry through. Otherwise, you're just using them for the buff, which really isn't worth it, because the other two katanas of Lightning Slash are just gonna perform better than this weapon. And that is true even at low levels. That is despite the fact that on paper, Ice Lightning Sword gives a bigger buff, just because the base AR of the weapon is so much higher. Additionally, they're both longer than the Dragonscale Blade. Even though Ice Lightning is a match made in heaven, there's just better ways to pull out the build, like Frost Pots or a quick swap weapon of Chilling Mist. Additionally, it has no innate status effect, nor does it have a unique moveset. The weapon is just poor in so many categories that it is simply the worst in class, as there's nothing it truly succeeds in, at least nothing that's done better by something else. This is different from number 12 on our list, the Serpentbone Blade. This weapon is actually different than every other katana because it's the only one with innate poison buildup, specifically deadly poison. Additionally, it has the highest AR out of all the non-somber katanas. However, this weapon has a bit of an identity crisis because it cannot be infused, however, still uses regular smithing stones. Additionally, this one does not have any bleed buildup. And both of these factors really do hurt the weapon because it has to compete with the Nagakiba and the hand of Malenia, which both those two just have a much higher reach and a higher overall damage potential, which just allow them to eclipse this weapon in so many ways. Now, this weapon used to have a unique heavy attack, however, with the introduction of the Sword of Night, it's no longer unique in that regard either. And while this weapon would be good overall, the biggest thing that holds this one down is not having a unique skill, and not being able to change a skill. Honestly, the fact that it's a non-somber weapon, I feel like we should have at least gotten that. Especially since we have weapons that don't need a change of infusion to change a skill, the perfumes. Number 10 on our list, the Meteoric Ore Blade, and many would place this as the worst katana in the game, especially since this is a somber weapon with a non-unique skill, and it has horrible reach. However, this weapon has an advantage that no other katana has. It has the highest AR in this class, and that includes elemental infusions, and that even includes the Sword of Night. Additionally, it has a unique heavy attack that comes out insanely fast, even when fully charged. However, let's not overglaze this weapon. First of all, the heavy attack is a very similar attack to a lot of the other katana's two-handed moveset, which means you don't really get too many sweeping or thrust attacks that use the full extent of a katana's reach. Additionally, because it's so short, it's actually not great for power stancing at all. And to top it off, its weapon skill is Gravitas, which is a non-unique skill that has very little utility or damage, resulting in a weapon that has to rely both on moveset and attacks. And for this weapon, that ain't helping at all. In fact, the only reason why I put it above the Serpentbone Blade is because it has bleed rather than deadly poison. The only thing that this katana really has going for it is a faster heavy attack and a really high AR. But in every other way, it does fail compared to every other katana, outside of the Dragonscale Blade, which has almost no use at all. Now, finally, number 10 on our list. People are gonna not like me for this one, but let's just cut the chatter, shall we? The Uchigatana. Now, this thing right here, it is good, but it's not that good. The range on this thing right here lacks, and it barely outdoes the Nagakiba in terms of damage. And when I say barely, I mean like 4 damage, so it is less than even a percent. And yet, if you whiff 1 attack out of 100, the Nagakiba is just going to be better than this weapon. At least for that kind of build. However, there is a saving grace. It does have an amazing occult scaling, and it does scale decently better on strength. However, the big thing about this weapon is it has very low requirements. That means if you're going anything but a dex build, this is going to be your go-to infusible katana. And it's especially good on occult infusion. Number 9 on our list is going to be the Dragonhunter Great Katana. Now, I love the thematics of this weapon, especially since the idea of Dragon Communion has been an amazing concept in Elden Ring. However, this right here gets no arcane scaling. Additionally, while it's kind of in the middle of the pack between the 2 other Great Katanas in terms of damage, it is actually the lowest damaging Great Katana for one reason and one reason only. It cannot be buffed. And for its skill, it's really not that great. However, it does give quality builds a nice projectile move unique to itself. And that skill has amazing hyper armor. It is telegraphed and it is slow. If you're fighting a dragon, this right here is an amazing weapon. If you're playing a quality build, this is an amazing weapon. However, pure builds are still going to do more damage overall. And if you're playing a quality build, other builds have gotten buffed, especially the colossal variety. But even then, it has competition with the Bloodhound's Fang, and the Bloodhound's Fang is clearly winning this one. Now, the next 3 on our list are about the same in terms of quality and how good they are, but for very different purposes. But still, I have to rank them honestly, so here we go. Now, I'm going to start this one off with the Rivers of Blue, I mean the Starline Sword. The weapon itself is actually really good, and it's a dex favoring, dex int weapon, which is actually pretty rare. In fact, this is the only one of its type outside of certain cold infused weapons and certain cold ashes of war. Now, the overall damage potential of the weapon, mostly due to its skill, is absolutely amazing, and it has great hit detection, and it has a great hit stun for humanoid enemies. However, it has one downside, which is why I have to put it below the next 2. In order for the skill to do a lot of damage, you have to get to the second part of the combo, but the weapon skill is very slow to get there. So enemies you cannot make to stagger are not going to be hit by the full combo, and therefore you're not going to get as much mileage out of this weapon. Additionally, it sets you up for a free strike from the enemy. So when you get hit, you're going to be flailing out of it and falling on the ground. Now, overall, this weapon has a higher AR and damage than the Moonveil, but it's not by much. The only thing this weapon really needs is some sort of improvement to its Ash of War, but it doesn't even need to be by much. Now, the next weapon is going to be a weapon that has been a curse upon the game for a long time, the Rivers of Blood. Now, this right here is a scourge of earlier patches, where it used to be one of the best dex arcane weapons in the game, and still even up to this day. However, its skill was nerfed, but it's still incredibly great, especially with those amazing projectile attacks. Now, the thing is, this weapon does get outperformed by the Nagakiba and Uchigatana when they have double slash, especially when Bloodflame Blade is applied. And so I do not actually recommend this as a dex weapon. However, this weapon right here is more friendly for arcane builds. The Ash of War scales almost entirely off of arcane outside the blade, and the blade itself scales mostly off of arcane even though it has a descaling, because it's scaling 2 damage types at once. Now, this weapon does have other advantages, like for example, having lower dex and strength requirements than the Nagakiba, and having a higher reach than the Uchigatana. Now, for number 5 on the list, I'm going to go with the PvP Blender tool, the Hand of Malenia. Now, here's the thing, I love this weapon. It got a massive boost in patch 1.10 where its weapon skill could actually take a couple hits in PvP, and it is an absolute blender. And because it has the highest physical AR out of all the katanas, it makes it an amazing tool with a retaliatory cross-tree talisman and letters armor, and aesthetically, it looks incredible too. Out of all the katanas, outside the great katanas, it has the second longest range. So if I talk so good about it, then why am I ranking it at number 5? Well, first, let's look at the skill. The skill takes a long time to start up, and if you get hit while you're in the middle of the skill, you're falling to the ground, you lose all your stamina, and you are going to get punished for it. And PvP, if people know what they're doing, yeah, they can punish you quite easily for it as well. It's still a great skill and it still does a lot of damage, but the window to use it is pretty short. In addition, it doesn't really have a unique moveset. Now, the base katana moveset is absolutely incredible. However, there are much better katana movesets, specifically when we look at weapons like the Serpentbone Blade, the Sword of Night, and the Nagakiba. They simply just have a better heavy attack. Now the next two are incredible weapons that are neck and neck for me, and that would be the Sword of Night and the Moonveil. Now I'm going to actually rank Moonveil as number 5, even with the buff to Ornalis cameo. Now here's the thing, the reach and the AR of this weapon is nothing impressive, especially for a split damage weapon. The moveset is nothing too shiny either. However, there's one thing that does make this right here shine above almost all the katanas before it. Its skill, Transient Moonlight. Now this right here is effectively the same thing as Unsheath, but it does less damage. However, it comes with a projectile attack which can go a far distance, and this can be very intimidating in PvP because you have two variants, a horizontal and vertical one. The horizontal one comes out much faster, while the vertical one does much more damage. And with the change to Ornalis cameo, waiting a second can give you a 45% increase in damage, and it comes out much more reliably. And because it's a projectile attack, you can almost guarantee getting that 45% increase against bosses. Additionally, you do not need to wait for Ornalis buff anyways. However, this is definitely not the best setup for katanas at all for PvP or PvE. In general, a lot of other options just do more damage. It's just a very safe and easy way to play the game, which kind of comes in very early on and gets stronger with the cameo. But when you try to compare this to Sword of Night, it becomes a very different story. Because the Sword of Night, which is number 4 on the list, this right here is a multi-hit katana that can go through shields and is an absolute blender in PvP to the point where, yeah, you could just straight up one combo somebody, and the changes made in the recent patch made it even better. And that is despite the fact that this katana has a terrible reach. So the reason why I call this katana a blender is because it's a multi-hit machine. Your multi-hit talismans absolutely love this weapon, as both your weapon skill Witching Hour Slash and your heavy attack lean heavily straight into it. Now with its weapon skill, I do not recommend charging it unless you have the time to. In fact, that is the biggest misuse I've seen with this weapon. Now the weapon skill is very similar to Waterfowl Dance, however, it comes out much faster, making it much more useful in PvE. In addition, the skill is really great at roll catching players, and if the skill actually tags a player, you could hit them for a true combo with your heavy attack. Now in overall damage, this does about the same amount of damage as a Hand of Malenia, just due to the split scaling. It's the combo of its skill and Ash of War that make it absolutely incredible, and to top it off, the skill itself goes completely around shields, ignoring them entirely. Now for number 3 on the list, the Great Katana. So here's the thing, this weapon right here is probably the most versatile weapon out of all the katanas in the game. It is great on heavy infusion, keen infusion, occult infusion, and yes, even the elemental infusions, be it lightning, fire, flame, sacred, or magic. And this weapon right here effectively replaces everything the Flamberge did, but it's even better. With one exception, it does not have any hyper armor. The thing is, this weapon absolutely loves skill spamming. This weapon has a higher one-handed AR compared to any infusible greatsword with a much higher reach. And like all other infusible katanas, it does have a base bleed buildup, making it a very good combo with something like Bloodflame Blade or an occult infusion. Even then, it is not the best katana on the list, because number 2 on the list is the Nagakiba, which for some reason is longer and has a higher strength and dex requirement than the Great Katana. And let's just say this weapon has a very similar AR to the Uchigatana. And when I say that, I mean literally by 1. And the range on this thing is absolutely deceptive. It is stupidly long. Meaning that Ashes of War like Unsheath are probably gonna hit. In fact, despite the fact that it has about the reach of a great weapon, it still gets a faster light weapon animations, which makes this thing absolutely brutal. In addition, this weapon has a really good running attack and heavy attack. In addition, very similar to the Great Katana, you can put Bloodflame Blade on it. However, the best thing about this weapon is its reach, and let me tell you why that's the case. So you remember how we talked about the Moonveil and the Rivers of Blood, where it had Corpse Piler and Transient Moonlight? Well, this weapon has Double Slash and Unsheath. And with those, it will do more damage. And because it's a dex setup, it can come in multiple different flavors. You could do Frost, you could do Lightning, you could do Blood, or you could do Blood Flame, or you could even do Poison. And while I did say it was mostly a dexterity weapon, you can still run this on Arcane build or Strength build and still do incredibly well. Just note that this weapon has incredibly high weapon requirements. And finally, to the number 1. Some may say the perfect moveset does not exist, then explain this. Coming in number 1 on our list, the Rakshasas. So the thing about this weapon, it has incredibly high hyper armor. And while it's supposed to increase your damage while you're attacking with this, it doesn't increase it by that much at all, to the point where you may as well ignore it. So how is this weapon ridiculous? Well, a few things. One, it has amazing hyper armor. But I don't think I mentioned how amazing it is. It is very comparable to Great Hammers, which means sometimes you're going to win a trade against a Colossal Greatsword. And yes, you heard that right. It has the AR of a Colossal Greatsword. But you know what its strength requirement is? 12! I cannot preface how low that is. This wooden stick has a strength requirement of 17. And the Nagakiba has a strength requirement of 18. And yet this chunk of metal that allows you to take great swords and great hammers to the face without flinching has a strength requirement of 12. In addition to all that, this weapon's moveset is absolutely ridiculous. This katana can thrust over and over and over again as if it was a spear, then immediately swap into slashing attacks. That makes it so your mix-up potential is absolutely insane. This actually makes it very difficult for players to read what you're about to do next. The fact is, this is not thrusting just to thrust. This damage is actually pretty good. And finally, its skill. Weed Cutter is absolutely abusive to anything that can be staggered. Any humanoid enemy, anything like an omen or a player character is just going to get shredded if they're caught in this combo. The weapon's biggest downside is the fact to use it to its fullest, you need to understand the combos of this weapon. Which attacks lead into a slash attack and which attacks lead into a piercing attack. But if you're to get it down, this weapon pretty much has everything. Due to its raw versatility, damage, and power, this is why I consider it the best katana in the game. If you got this far in the video, thank you so much. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have an awesome day.